And now we leave the book of Genesis behind, which records the story of all of those people that we have looked at up through verse 22. And we come into the book of Exodus, and the book of Exodus tells us the story of Moses.
Start off just reading the book of Exodus without having read or studied the book of Genesis. I think you're going to find yourself a little lost without the background that the book of Genesis gives.
And here we look at the second phase in this sort of four-part transition in Moses' life. This transition from being this sort of prince in Egypt to being a leader of the Exodus. This transition that takes a number of years and that takes a rather winding road.
We think often of Moses as being an old man with a beard, but it was in his youth that he made the decisions that brought him to greatness. Because the scripture says by faith Moses, when he'd come to years, maybe 17 or 18 years of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter.
Welcome to Diggin Deeper, a simple Bible study where we dig deeper into the Word of God. Thank you for joining me. I am your host, Billy Ray Parrish. And today's study will take place in a new book, the book of Exodus. We have finished the first book of the Bible, Genesis, our beginning. And now we continue with a new part of the history of Israel. On our last program, we dug deeper into Exodus chapter 11, so we have finished a quarter of the book of Exodus. In the first 11 chapters of Exodus, we have witnessed the growing population of the Jews in the land of Egypt, and the fear of Pharaoh that this population is a threat to Egypt. He places an order on the male children born in Egypt to be killed, the birth of Moses, and his growth into adulthood, and the miracle of the burning bush, and godly instructions to Moses that he will lead the Israelite people out of bondage in Egypt. Unfortunately, Pharaoh will not be a willing participant, so there is much drama to come, including plagues upon Egypt. Exodus chapter 12 made up of 51 verses. This chapter is jam-packed full of events. And beginning with verse 1, And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls every man. According to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Ye shall take it out from the sheep, or from the goats, and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood, and strike it on the 2 side posts, and on the upper doorpost of the houses, wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, and unleavened bread. And with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden at all with water, but roast with fire his head with his legs, and with the purtenance thereof. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning. And that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. And thus shall ye eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial. And ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day there shall be an holy convocation. And in the 7th day there shall be an holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the 1st month, on the 14th day of the month at even, ye shall eat unleavened bread, until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Ye shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations shall ye eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel, and said unto them, Draw out, and take you a lamb according to your families, and kill the Passover. And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop, and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the 2 side posts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning, for the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the 2 side posts, the Lord will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. And ye shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass, when ye be come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he hath promised, that ye shall keep this service. And it shall come to pass, when your children shall say unto you, What mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians, and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped. And the children of Israel went away, and did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. And it came to pass, that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he, and all his servants, and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up, and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord, as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We be all dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses. And they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver, and jewels of gold, and raiment, and the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men, beside children. And a mixed multitude went up also with them in flocks, and herds, even very much cattle. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough, which they brought forth out of Egypt. For it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt, and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victual. Now the sojourning of the children of Israel, who dwelt in Egypt, was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day it came to pass, that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof, but every manservant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A foreigner and an hired servant shall not eat thereof. In one house shall it be eaten. Thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall ye break a bone thereof. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised. And then let him come near and keep it. And he shall be as one that is born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you. Thus did all the children of Israel, as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. And it came to pass the selfsame day, that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their armies. The events in Exodus chapter 12 are significant for many different reasons and historic. What we see, among other things, is God giving the Israelites the Passover. And this signified their readiness for change. It represented day one of a new start of trusting in and following the Lord. Verse 2. 3 features of the Passover emphasized how they could prepare for that new life: a sacrifice, sandals, and a blood mark. For the Israelites, the coming deliverance from Egypt was such a significant act that God instructed them to remake their calendar. The new year would now start with the month of their redemption from Egypt, which was in. Illustrated everything was going to change. Charles Spurgeon wrote, "Commence a nation's annals from its evangelization. Begin the chronicle of a people from the day when they bow at the feet of Jesus." According to the customs of this day, on the 10th of this first month, each family or household was to take a lamb. And the lamb was to live with the family for the 4 days until Passover on the 10th day of this month, until the 14th day of the same month. These traditions and customs may not make sense to us today, but they were commonplace according to the traditions and customs of the day. Research shows the lamb became part of the family. By the time it was sacrificed on the 14th, it was both cherished and mourned. God wanted the sacrifice of something precious. The Passover was also a way to commemorate the Israelites' deliverance from slavery in Egypt, and instructions were given to smear the blood of a sacrificed lamb on their doorposts and lintels. This was a sign that God would pass over their homes and not kill their firstborn. The Passover meal is a family eating hurriedly while wearing sandals, girding their loins, and holding their staff, and it was to celebrate the feast of unleavened bread after removing all leaven from their homes. They were to eat unleavened bread for 7 days, beginning and ending with a communal feast, according to Jewish tradition. Exodus 12 verse 2 to be the first commandment given to the Israelites by God. And the verse clarifies that the first month is in the spring, not the autumn. Verse 3 sees God instructing the Israelites to choose a lamb or young goat for sacrifice on the 10th day of the month. This was part of God's instructions to Moses and Aaron for the first Passover. But God instructs the Israelites that if a household is too small to eat a whole lamb, they should share with their nearest neighbor. This communal commandment was intended to strengthen ties between families and neighbors. The requirements for the lamb to be sacrificed, including that it must be without imperfections, complete and whole. This symbolizes the sinless nature of Jesus Christ, the ultimate Passover lamb. The lamb could be chosen from either sheep or goats. The word translated sheep in verses 3-5 literally means one of a flock. These verses illustrate the importance of sacrifice and atonement, and the idea that deliverance comes through obedience to God. The Israelites were instructed to smear the blood of a lamb on their doorposts, lintels, and sides as a sign of obedience and faith in God. This may seem like a crazy thing to do, but the Israelites were demonstrating their trust in God's protection and believing that the divine judgment would pass over their homes. Further, the Israelites were showing their faith in God's promise. God gave the Israelites for their first Passover meal. The Israelites were commanded to eat the flesh of a sacrificed lamb, which represented the cost of deliverance. Unleavened bread symbolized the haste required during their exodus. Bitter herbs recall the suffering endured in slavery. Sandals and staff were instructed as they consumed the lamb. The sandals on and staff in hand, to underscore the urgency of their deliverance. God gave instructions for preparing and eating the Passover lamb. The instructions for roasting the lamb symbolize the importance of obedience and reverence in worship. The lamb was to be roasted whole, with the head, legs, and internal organs intact, to signify the completeness of the sacrifice and God's deliverance. Roasting the lamb instead of boiling or eating it raw set the Israelites apart from the Egyptians, who often practiced sacrificial traditions that involved boiling or eating raw meat. The lamb was to be placed on the table undivided, symbolizing the unity and fellowship between the Israelites and the Lord. Instructions were given to eat the meal quickly, emphasizing the urgency of not procrastinating. The first 10 verses emphasize the importance of obedience, holiness, and completeness in worship. The Passover meal had instructions attached to it, and how to eat, including eating the meal with a sense of urgency, with their loins girded, shoes on their feet, and staff in hand. We are getting closer to freedom for the Israelites, or Pharaoh finally living up to his word, as we witness the final plague from the 10 plagues upon Egypt. The 10th plague was the death of the firstborn. This included the firstborn children and animals. This event leads to Pharaoh allowing the Israelites to leave Egypt. Here, God declares his intention to execute the most severe of plagues, targeting the very heart of Egyptian society, its firstborn sons. There is going to be judgment against all the false gods of Egypt. And when God takes the firstborn sons, the blood will serve as a sign on the houses where you live. Instructions are given that this day be remembered and celebrated as a lasting ordinance, emphasizing its permanence within Israel's religious life. In the context of the Passover, the Israelites were directed to remove all leaven from their homes as a preparatory step. According to Earl Hinn of the Church of the Great God, Paul plainly instructs that the purpose of keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread is to remind us of our need to remove sin from our lives. Penny Noyes of Christianity.com explains, the annual Passover celebration is a symbolic reenactment of the Israelites' last night as slaves in Egypt. The Passover is a time of remembrance for God's people. God gave Moses specific instructions regarding the annual celebration of God's deliverance from their slavery in Egypt. In the Bible, whenever yeast is referenced, it's typically symbolizing sin. So during this celebration, the meal is eaten without the yeast, which is symbolic of removing sin from our lives. Verse 17 build on the Passover meal and the importance on remembrance. Ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Verse 18 was a way for the Israelites to remember and commemorate the miraculous events that led to their liberation. The instruction to abstain from eating leavened bread for 7 days directly reflects the urgency of Israel's impending exodus from Egypt. The law was very strict as to the Passover, and the Jews were so in their usages that no leaven should be found in their houses. Bible Study Tools explains of the reading, "For whoso eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel," which is repeated to deter them from the breach of this ordinance. See Gill on Exodus 12 verse 15. And it is added for further explanation of whom it concerns, whether he be a stranger or born in the land by a stranger is meant, not a mere heathen, who was not bound by this law, but a proselyte. And not a proselyte of the gate, one that was only a sojourner among them, and observed the commandments of the sons of Noah, but a proselyte of righteousness, who professed the Jewish religion, and proposed to conform to it in all respects, and therefore was obliged to observe this as other precepts. And by one born in the land is intended a native of the land of Canaan, whither they were now going in order to possess it, or a real Israelite, such as were born of Israelitish parents, and proper inhabitants of Canaan, which they would be put into the possession of. Verse 20, the instruction to eat unleavened bread and avoid leavened products is a symbolic gesture that represents the Israelites' haste to leave Egypt. Moses instructs the elders of Israel to select a lamb for each of their families, and then to sacrifice it as part of the Passover observance. And the act of obediently sacrificing the lamb was a crucial part of the Israelites' protection and redemption from the plague. Verse 22 serves as a reminder of the importance of faith and obedience. Without question, much of this chapter, and so much of what Moses and Aaron were called to do in Exodus thus far have illustrated the importance of faith and obedience, further pointing towards the ultimate redemption and salvation provided through the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ. The instruction to apply lamb's blood to the doorframe serves as a physical sign of their faith and obedience to God's command. This act is not just a ritual, but a profound expression of trust in God's promise to spare them from the impending judgment. The Israelites were reminded to observe it all, not just one occurrence or event he hold before observed relating to the feast of the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread, and all the rites appertaining to them, which were to be observed until the coming of Christ. The event was to be remembered even after they entered the land of God. After leaving Egypt, they are to continue to observe the Passover as a perpetual ordinance. The purpose is not merely to perform a ritual, as in doing something just to be doing something, but to instill a deeper understanding of the event's meaning. In a further act of worship, the sons of Israel went and did so just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. Verse 29 is inching closer to the 10th plague, and here we a demonstration of the power and sovereignty of God, a pivotal moment of divine judgment and redemption, and a foreshadowing of the broader biblical narrative of deliverance and salvation. In the morning, when Pharaoh awoke, there was a great cry throughout Egypt, as every house of the Egyptians had at least one dead. According to Clark's commentary on verse 29, there was a great cry. No people in the universe were more remarkable for their mournings than the Egyptians. Especially in matters of religion, they whipped, beat, tore themselves, and howled in all the excess of grief. When a relative died, the people left the house, ran into the streets, and howled in the most lamentable and frantic manner. We see throughout this chapter, and throughout the first 2 books of the Bible, just as Pharaoh and Egypt was beginning to understand the consequences of disobedience, the righteousness of divine judgment, and the symbolism of sacrifice and redemption. The ballgame has completely changed, and Pharaoh's pride has been broken by divine judgment. Following the devastating death of the firstborn in Egypt, Pharaoh not only acknowledges Moses, but urgently commands him to leave with the Israelites. It took 10 devastating plagues before Pharaoh got the bigger picture. But I do believe this happens to all of us from time to time. It may not take 10 plagues, but God has to do great things to us in our lives before we get the bigger picture. The Egyptians begin to understand as they have living proof, and overcome with fear and desperation, urging the Israelites to leave the land without delay. According to the website Bible Art, verse 34 captures a pivotal moment in the history of the Israelites. As they obediently prepare to leave Egypt in haste, trusting in God's guidance and protection. The symbolism of unleavened bread and the careful preparations for departure underscore the urgency and spiritual readiness required for the journey ahead. This verse carries profound meanings of obedience, deliverance, and redemption, serving as a timeless reminder of the faithfulness and power of God in fulfilling His promises. Verse 35 symbolizes the Israelites' departure from Egypt and their newfound freedom, as well as God's faithfulness to His promises and His concern for justice. Apparently, the Israelites had gained favor from the people of Egypt as they were urged to leave, and we see this with Jacob way back in Genesis when his 2 sons, Simeon and Levi, destroyed the city of Shechem in retaliation of what had been done to their sister, Dinah. Jacob was worried about leaving as he feared retaliation, but God protected his family from such acts. Verse 37 features a turning point as the Israelites begin their journey out of Egypt. Apparently, verse 30 informs us that after the series of miracles that God performed in Egypt, many locals, Egyptians and others, decided to leave with the Israelites and joined them in their trek to worship the God of heaven and earth. Verse 39 refers to the haste with which the Israelites were commanded to leave Egypt. For example, the instructions from God were the Israelites were not allowed to wait for their bread to rise, so they baked unleavened bread as they fled. This symbolizes the Israelites' readiness to leave at a moment's notice, and their obedience to God's command. According to Clark's commentary, now the sojourning of the children of Israel. The statement in this verse is allowed on all hands to be extremely difficult, and therefore the passage stands in a special need of illustration. That the descendants of Israel did not dwell 430 years in Egypt, says Dr. Kennicott, may be easily proved, and has often been demonstrated. Some therefore imagine that by Egypt here both it and Canaan are to be understood. But this greater latitude of place will not solve the difficulty, since the Israelites, including Israel their father, did not sojourn 430 years in both countries previous to their departure from Egypt. Verse 41, after 430 years of captivity. The very day marks their liberation is of immense significance, symbolizing not just physical freedom, but the beginning of their journey as God's chosen people. This verse marks the precise moment when the Israelites were freed from Egypt after 430 years. The phrase "to the very day" emphasizes that God's timing is exact and intentional. Clark's commentary on verse 42, a night to be held in everlasting remembrance, because of the peculiar display of the power and goodness of God, the observance of which annually was to be considered a religious precept, while the Jewish nation should continue. God gives the instructions on how the Passover should take place, including who should eat and participate, and who should not. Bible Study Tools explains, the same time he acquainted them with the above things. This is the ordinance of the Passover as before delivered, and these the laws and rules according to which it is to be observed, as now related, both with respect to the lamb and to the unleavened bread. And the following is an account of the persons that were to partake of it. There shall no stranger eat thereof, one that is of another country, an entire heathen, and unacquainted with, and does not profess the Jewish religion, which was the religion of God. For example, a slave who has been bought by an Israelite may partake in the Passover meal, but only after he has been circumcised. Verse 45 teaches us God emphasizes the exclusivity of His covenant community during the Passover. That is, the instructions highlight that only those who are circumcised, those committed to the covenant, may partake in the sacrificial meal. Verse 47 notes the instruction regarding the lamb's consumption emphasizes community and unity among the Israelites, as they were commanded to eat the Passover lamb in one house and not take any of the meat out. God commanded the Israelites to eat the Passover meal together in one house, emphasizing the communal aspect of the celebration. Christianity.com points out, from Matthew Henry's commentary, in times to come, all the congregation of Israel must keep the Passover. All that share in God's mercies should join in thankful praises for them. The New Testament Passover, the Lord's Supper, ought not to be neglected by any. Clark's commentary on verse 48, and when a stranger will keep the Passover, let all who sojourn among you, and who desire to partake of this sacred ordinance, not only be circumcised themselves, but all the males of their families likewise, that they may all have an equal right to the blessings of the covenant. Verse 49 illustrates the importance of treating others with fairness, compassion, and respect, regardless of their background or origin. This is a lesson for each of us today, regardless of where we are on earth, or where we are in our walks with Christ. Verse 50 emphasizes the importance of obedience to God's word. The Israelites' willingness to do exactly what the Lord commanded reflects their faith in God's promises and their recognition of His authority. We end with verse 51, which marks the culmination of the Israelites' journey towards liberation from Egypt. We see that the adherence to God's commands results in salvation and assurance amid judgment. We have reached the end of our Bible study today for Exodus chapter 12. We have experienced many firsts and historical events in the book of Genesis. And now, we are beginning a new history for the Israelite people, including the turning of Pharaoh against the Jewish people, the death order, and the arrival of Moses, and God's instructions for Moses to lead the Jewish people out of slavery. But Pharaoh will not be convinced so easily. The last several chapters have illustrated the significance and destruction of the plagues upon Egypt, and now we have arrived at the last plague and the Passover of the Israelites. There is no telling what the next studies will reveal, so join us next time for our Bible study here on Diggin Deeper, as we simply dig deeper into the Word of God. Before we go, if you liked what you just watched, like and share our content. It really helps us grow. And think about subscribing to our channel, which will help you keep up to date with all of our content. Once again, I am your host, Billy Ray Parrish, and until next time, thank you for joining us. Stay safe and God bless.